Hi.
Hello.
We're going to continue to read from Ray Franz's book, In Search of Christian Freedom, and we've been talking about the place of Carl Adams in the publication of the book called Organization for Kingdom Preaching and Disciple Making.
We used to refer to that book in its first form as the organization book, and of course it was severely revised and even reversed in the policies that it expressed in the 70s were now scrapped in the 1980s. And I remember there was kerfuffle over that at the time. But let's follow the data about Carl Adams and his attempt to change the policies.
And his thinking on these things. Okay. When the project was nearing completion, Carl Adams wrote a letter to President Knorr, asking for guidance on specific points. While dealing with what we three had been developing, the letter, dated November 18, 1971, was not a joint composition by the three of us. The wording was that of Carl Adams himself. He was the presidentially appointed overseer of the writing department, and Ed Dunlap and I were his subordinates in that department. He was therefore certainly under no pressure to discuss what he discussed or to present the information in the way that he presented it. I believe that Carl would honestly acknowledge that fact. Note then what he wrote to President Knorr as to the effects that the use of the organization's report slip has on the individual witness, as presented in a section of his letter headed Reporting Field Service.
Here's a direct quote from Carl Adams' letter. At present, we report books, booklets, and magazines placed, also subscriptions obtained. The result is that all too often, the publishers, that is individual witnesses, view their success in terms of placements. The literature is a wonderful aid in helping people to learn the truth, but the publishers are frequently inclined to view the placement as their goal. When they meet someone who already has literature, instead of focusing their attention on the vital work of disciple making, they incline to think in terms of what new publication they have that they might place with the person. Why? They know that the congregation is going to keep a record of what they personally place. This influences their use of the literature. Also, the fact that placements are reported influences the basis on which servants, that is elders in the congregation, are inclined to appraise the work being done by the publishers. There is no report of the love shown to other brothers, or how a person discharges Christian responsibilities in his home, or of his manifesting the fruit of the Spirit. So the tendency is to emphasize the value of these figures on the publisher's report card beyond what they deserve.
So now continuing with Franz's discussion. Few witnesses could do other than agree with Carl Adams' observations, for they know them to be true. Carl had asked Ed Dunlap and me for our observations, and we particularly commented on the scriptural problems with the whole policy of reporting. Some of these comments are reflected in what Carl goes on to write. Yet it would be wrong to assume that what he wrote did not reflect his own thinking on the subject. Those knowing him know that he is not a person who easily adopts others' views or presents them as his own, particularly those of subordinates. Not only are the following words those of Carl Adams, the thoughts they express are also his, for he expressed them in essence in his discussion with us. I was, in fact, surprised at the degree of frankness manifest in his letter. Carl wrote,
Direct quote here, admittedly, the entire arrangement of reporting our field service is something beyond what the Bible specifically requires of Christians. This being so, whatever may be done in the way of reporting should be handled in a way that will avoid any clash with Jesus' counsel, namely, quote, take good care not to practice your righteousness in front of men in order to be observed by them. This is, of course, a direct reference to Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. Carl goes on also at 2 Corinthians 10, verse 12. Paul warned against seeking to exalt oneself by the making of comparisons, and refers us also to Galatians 5, verse 26. Yet, Carl says, the keeping of a record of placements tends to make publishers think in those terms. As is well known, circuit servants, that is overseers, have left hard-working servants or elders in congregations discouraged because of pushing them on matters involving their field service reports, when they were actually trying hard to shepherd the flock. But of course, that time does not show on the report. And in speaking to the entire congregation, a circuit servant, overseer, often makes more of whether the congregation is placing 12 magazines per publisher than whether there is genuine Christian love in the congregation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can remember wrestling with things like, if I knew someone was in need of some practical help, and yet because I was a pioneer, I knew, I had to get my time in, I had to meet my quotas. So then should I sacrifice that and go and help that person? And I even got into trouble for helping people at the door, even like one of my calls, I remember offering to do some housework for her because she had a bad back. And I didn't count that time, of course, because I just was doing something practical for her. But then I didn't make my time, and I got in trouble for doing those kinds of things. To me, I thought, this doesn't seem the right way of going about things. I thought it would be more like loving people into the kingdom by doing kind things for them, taking care of those, shut-ins or elderly people. We tried to be conscious of them and fit them into the schedule, but oftentimes it did mean that you would be sacrificing
more meaningful things.
Yeah.
So literally, those things didn't count. And when you think of the appropriateness of that word, you didn't get to count time spent shepherding. And I remember too that when I was this school overseer for 7 years, during some of that time I was serving as a pioneer as well. And I remember the difference that made in that your priorities just switch around. Theoretically, an overseer should be shepherding the flock, right? But now your priority switches to, instead of taking care of the sheep that are already there, going out and finding more sheep. Even when Bible studies were the richest part of that, and I often had many Bible studies at the same time, but it was different than doing the number counting. Counting Bible studies was one thing, but counting placements and time.
I think people could, in some ways, end up sacrificing their family too, because you're so pressured. I remember one pioneer taking her newborn baby, who was only a few weeks old, out in service in the middle of winter, below 0 temperatures. You just don't do that.
What was she doing pioneering anyway with a new baby?
But she was a pioneer, and she felt she had to make her time, so she'd go out with her little one. It just isn't right to prioritize it so that people don't count.
People don't count.
That the report card actually counts more.
And their numbers.
The people in your lives, the children you're raising, the husband you're married to.
In the end, people aren't people anymore. They're no statistics.
So I do remember us commenting when we left the witnesses, when we started to do this kind of work of working with ex-witnesses and training Christians in how to speak to Jehovah's Witnesses and just anybody who we were collecting new friends, like collecting new people, and Bible discussion always came up. There was no pressure to do it. It was because where your heart is, that's what you're going to speak about. But I remember saying to you at one point, boy, if we were only counting our time now, because your motivation is totally different. It's because you love people that you're going to do these things, and there was a real feeling of freedom there. relief. That you didn't have to be concerned. You could just go ahead and love people and serve them in whatever way suited the occasion.
Heart motivation. And I remember, ironically, that we were getting counsel from our fellow Christians to be less busy, not more busy, to not do as much.
Yeah.
In the next segment, Carl Adams' influence is traced further in especially though, his conclusion, namely that, yes, we're in effect putting too much pressure on people. We're setting up human standards, that we're judging their devotion to God by human standards.
Yeah.
In the next segment.